In this video, we're going to look at exercise 4.1, question 1 from QMaths 12a. The question asks that we find the mean, median, mode, range, interquartile range, and standard deviation of each of the following sets of scores. The first one I'm going to look at has this set of data that you can see on the screen now, 26, 27, 23, and so on. There's a total of 14 scores there. So let's have a look first of all at the measures of central tendencies, the center of the set of data. So the first one we could look at is calculating the mean. And the mean, when we're given data just in this raw format like this, is given by adding up or summing, remember the summation notation, the sum of the scores, which we call x's, and then dividing that number by n, the total number of scores that we're given, or total number of values. So in this case, that means adding up all of these numbers, 26 plus 27 plus 23, and so on. I won't put in all the detail here, but you would need to do that if you were writing this out yourself and putting it into your calculator, all the way down to the end, 20 plus 27 plus 21. And remember, we need to sum those up first, and then we're going to divide that by n, the number of scores. If you add them up, there's 3, 6, 8, 11, 14 scores altogether. So n is 14 in this case. If you pop those values into your calculator, you should find that that's 330, and we're going to divide that by 14. And then once more to the calculator, 330 divided by 14, that's approximately, or around about 23.6. So an average of 23.6. And if you have a quick check back up to your values, 23.6 for values like that looks around about right for a measure of the center of those numbers. Next up, in measures of central tendency, we could look at the mode. Now the mode is the most common score. So if we look back up, what might be useful at this stage is to actually write those scores in order. We're going to use that as well in a moment when we look at the median or the middle score. So what I'll do is write out those values from up here in order from smallest to largest, making sure that I get them all. Starting off with the smallest number of 19, I'm going to tick them off as I go. 19, next is 20, then 21, and so on down the line. And there we are. So making sure that I've got all of those instances where we've got multiple of the same score as well, and I'll just check I've got the right number, 3, 6, 9, 12, 14 of them. I think I'm okay. Now in terms of the mode, that's the most common score, so we can go along the list. We'll see that there's 2 21s, there's also 2 23s, 25s, there's actually 3 27s, so the most common score is 27. Now onto the median. The median is the middle score. Now because we have 14 scores, that's an even number, 14. So we need to look at not the middle score because there is no middle score, but we go to the 7th and the 8th, which are as close as we can get to the middle, and take the average of those two. So if we look along 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, so the 7th score is 23, the 8th score is 24, so the median is the average of those, which is just right in between the two, so 23.5 for our median. And you can see all three of these numbers, in some sense, look like measures of center for our data, if you compare them back with the set of numbers we had. The other three values or data measures that we need to find here are measures of spread of the data, the range, the interquartile range, and the standard deviation. Now the range is not too hard to find. The range is just the maximum value minus the minimum value from the list of scores, or this list of values. So we can pick those out quite easily. The maximum is 27 and the minimum is 19. So we have 27 minus 19, which is pretty easy. That one's just 8. Now next up is the interquartile range, or IQR. The interquartile range is the third quartile value minus the first quartile value, Q3 minus Q1. Now to figure out what those are, I might just jump over to the site. Q1, in this case, because we have an even number of scores, n equals 14, that's going to be the n plus 2 divided by 4 term, or the item in the list. So n, remember that's 14. 14 plus 2 is 16. Divide it by 4 and you get 4. So we want the fourth score along, which is 21. And for Q3, it's just the same number, fourth, but from the end this time and not from the start. So we count back 1, 2, 3, 4 and get 26. So our interquartile range then is 26, take away 21. Q3 minus Q1. 26 minus 2. 21 is just 5. So that's our interquartile range. The final measure of spread that we're going to calculate is the standard deviation. I can call it SD, or as you will see in some of the books, they call it sigma, which is a Greek letter, sigma. Standard deviation, now again, we've been given our list of scores just as individual scores, not as frequencies. So the formula that we want to use is a square root, and we want the sum not of the x's this time, but of the x's squared. So we need to square each of the scores and then add them all up. And we want to divide that by n again. And we're going to take away the average or the mean, which we call x bar sometimes. And we want that value squared. Now the way we go about doing that, let's just bring it down. We again need the square root. And this is going to go really long here. The sum of the x's squared. Now remember the x's, just up a little bit here, are just our scores or our values in the set of data. So we need to add up, so I'm going to put it in brackets. First one squared, which is 19 all squared, plus the next one, 20 squared. So I'm just getting up here to these values. I'm going to square it and then add it. So plus 21 all squared, so on all the way down the line until we get to the end. So we're going to have 27 squared and 27 squared to finish it off. We'll close that up. That's our sum of x's squared. That's them there. We need to divide all of that by n, which was 14. If you remember, there were 14 scores. Looks like our square root needs to be a little bit longer. We want to take away the x bar. Remember, that's the symbol we use for mean, the average. The mean is x bar. Well, we want that number squared. Now remember, we calculated the mean earlier. That's up here. The mean was about 23.6. Now I did a bit of rounding with that from my calculator. Now the problem with rounding things off, if you square them, you're making that rounding error a lot bigger than it was in the first place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this number as, because it's an exact value, I'm going to use that as my mean when I come down the bottom here. So I'm going to say 330 over 14, all squared. So that's my mean squared. If you use the approximate value, you're going to be quite a bit off in terms of your answer for the standard deviation. Okay, now if you pop those all into your calculator, you should get a square root of this sum of squared terms should add up to be 7,874 divided by 14, and minus that 330 over 14 all squared, and we want the square root of that. Pop that into your calculator and you should get approximately 2.61 for the standard deviation of this set of data. Okay, so there we go. That's looking at a set of data given individually and finding the mean, the mode, the median as measures of central tendency, and then the range, interquartile range, and standard deviation as measures of spread or dispersion of the data.